So today we will be talking about DDoS attacks on companies and the impact that it has on them. DDoS attacks are something that are currently on the rise, and they don't seem to show any signs of slowing in progress. When a company is faced with a potential DDoS attack, they can take multiple approaches, but the most common is to attempt to mitigate it. This presentation will discuss what a DDoS attack is and how it happens. It will also talk about ways that it affects a company and the steps a company can take to mitigate the threat. All the sources that I use will be posted in the description below. So to start out, I would like to cover some simple terminology. DDoS stands for Distributed Denial of Service. DDoS attacks are carried out the same way that a DOS attack or denial of service attack is, except that a DDoS attack uses what is called a botnet. A botnet is a collection of infected computers called zombies. The zombie computers are then grouped into botnets and controlled by either a controller server or by the attacker directly, depending on the size of the botnet. This is typically done by installing a rootkit or utilizing a backdoor left in by the manufacturers. The attacker then sends commands to the computers to carry out the attack. So how exactly are these attacks carried out? To understand how a DDoS attack is carried out, you first need to know how a basic DOS attack is performed. DOS attacks use a technique called SYN flooding. SYN flooding takes advantage of the TCP three-way handshake. The three-way handshake has three parts to it. In the first step, a client computer sends a synchronize or SYN message to the server. This is really quite similar to the ping command, but however, with the ping command, most admins will disable the ability to ping outside of the network, and people won't be able to ping inside of the network. Most of the time, this is done by creating a demilitarized zone or DMZ. Within the DMZ, the individual computers are isolated, making the surface area for an attack significantly smaller. Doing this can secure your network a little better. The second step of the TCP three-way handshake is when the server receives the SYN message from the client computer. It responds with a synchronized acknowledge or SYN ACK message. The client computer then sends back an ACK message, and the connection is established between the two. In a SYN flood, the client computer never sends the ACK message back, and this essentially leaves the ports open on the server and does not allow for another computer of a legitimate user to access the server, thus denying them service. With a DOS attack, the client computers are infected with malware that allows code to be executed. All the infected computers or zombie computers are then grouped into a botnet together under the control of the attacker. This makes the volume of the attack much greater, and then it follows the same steps of a DOS attack. So you can see why this would be a problem. But why would this be a problem for big companies? DDoS attacks can actually devastate not only a company's reputation, but also their financial status. The most important thing to know about a DDoS attack is that, for the most part, the motive of the attack is a financial one. Most attackers will try to get a company to pay a ransom so that the attack is not performed on them. If a company is a little harder to persuade, the attacker might perform what is known as a demonstrative attack. A demonstrative attack is more of a show of power and a chance for the attacker to show off his skills to the target or maybe other potential targets. If the company does not pay the ransom, then the attacker will carry out the DDoS attack. Obviously, the full damage of the attack depends on how large the botnet is and the duration of the attack. Another thing to consider is that sometimes an attacker only actually has the power to carry out a demonstration attack and cannot actually deploy a large botnet. In this case, if a company did pay the attacker that can only carry out this demonstration attack, then they just gave out a considerable sum of money to someone that wouldn't really have done any major harm. So you need to be careful of that while still treating every threat as a very serious threat. Also with this, if a company does pay the ransom, then they get labeled as a favorable target because attackers will know that they will probably get a large sum of money from this company if they threaten them with a DDoS attack. This will also save an attacker some resources and time for something maybe a little bigger or better. Paying off an attacker can also heavily damage a company's reputation. If customers find out that a company will just use their money to pay off attackers, then they might not want to do business with that company anymore. This will further hurt the financial situation of the company. For an example, Equifax has recently lost a great deal of their business and a lot of customers due to the recent data breach. Now, however bad all of this may seem, there are in fact ways to prevent such a disaster from happening to the company. One way is to make sure that all the software and everything else is up to date and that all the bugs are patched. One such example of this is the Samba network software. Within the software, there was a vulnerability that allowed attackers to execute code remotely on devices with either a Linux or Unix operating system. This means that an attacker can use a computer running the Samba software and a Unix or Linux operating system and create a botnet out of them. This can easily be fixed by applying a patch to the software that would remove the vulnerability from the software. Another way is to configure the firewall to deny repeated packets. If you configure a firewall so that after a certain number of repeated packets are received from a certain IP, it will add that IP to a blocked list, denying any requests sent from that IP. Another way that a firewall can be configured is to implement an access control list, or an ACL. Within that ACL, you can control only certain IPs to connect to the network through the firewall. If an unauthorized IP attempts to connect to the network, then they are automatically denied. Another advantage that a company might have here is that if an attacker requested a ransom or gave a demonstration attack, then you as a company have enough time to prepare for an attack, and you can use the information that you gathered from the demonstration attack to develop a defensive strategy. If you know what ports that they used when they performed their attack, then you might be able to close off those ports on the date that your ransom runs out and the attacker said that they'd be attacking you, and simply tell your customers that you are performing routine maintenance or just applying an update to the site. You can also attempt to trace the IPs that were used in a demonstration attack to try and trace the attacker through all the zombies' computers and see if you can eventually find a common endpoint and eventually prevent the attack from happening. So in conclusion, DDoS attacks are an attempt by an attacker to disrupt network traffic and deny network access to users. It is important to prevent DDoS attacks because it can cause a very negative impact on revenue and reputation. By preventing attacks on a network, we reassure the safety of clients and the trust of the companies. So in this presentation, we talked about how a DDoS attack is carried out and the impact that it can have on a company. We also briefly talked about a few ways that a company could potentially mitigate an attack. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and if you would like more information, then please take a look at the links provided in the description. Thank you.